Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies. Everybody is here.
Malcolm X is one of the most well-known figures of the 20th century. You can see his face on t-shirts, hats, or hear his name in hip-hop songs, and he even had his own movie. Go to Netflix right now and you will see a 6-part series trying to figure out who killed Malcolm X. 60 years after his death and 100 since his birth, the image of Malcolm is alive as the black shining prince who wasn't afraid to shame the devil and make it plain about the racism that had been inflicted on black people.
Because the number one tactic that the white man has always used when he wanted to suppress and oppress and exploit has been divide and conquer.
We think we know the story of Malcolm well. His is supposed to be the tragic tale of redemption. The hustler who ended up in prison for his crimes and redeemed himself through finding religion in the Nation of Islam. We are told that he cleaned himself up and vented his anger against the white devils, but ultimately split the Nation of Islam when he realized that hating white people was a dead end. After he embraced true Islam, we are told he rejected his violence and embraced the civil rights movement. The ultimate tragedy in Malcolm's story is that he was gunned down before he could lay out his revolutionary vision for achieving freedom. The violence he preached consumed him, and he became a martyr in the unbending march towards liberation. But that is all a dangerous myth. That image on the poster is a myth, a distortion that reduced him to a symbol that has no meaning other than whatever people want to use him for.
The problem is, we see Malcolm, but we don't know him. Contrary to what you have heard, he did not preach hate, he was not anti-white, he never practiced any violence, he did not have a distrust of women, and most importantly, he did have a political program. Malcolm is the most important intellectual of the 20th century because he analyzed the problem and provided the solution.
I am Kehinde Andrews, and if you've seen me before, you will know that Malcolm is my inspiration. To mark Malcolm's 100th birthday, I wrote a book, Nobody Can Give You Freedom, The Real Mission of Malcolm X, to show the world the truth about Malcolm. Bringing the receipts, I expose the hype and the myth that is meant to bamboozle and lead us astray.
In this film though, I'm going to take you on a journey to understand why Malcolm's mission is more important today than it was when he was killed. And I'm going to start right here in Birmingham, where I was born and Malcolm visited just 9 days before he was assassinated.
In February 1965, Malcolm visited Smethwick when the Indian Workers Association brought him to the city and explained just how vicious the racism was. The KKK were burning crosses, the council were refusing to allow migrants housing, and in 1964, just a year before, Peter Griffiths won the election with the slogan, "If you want a coloured for a neighbour, vote Labour." Malcolm commented on the treatment of black and brown people at the time and said that, "I have heard they are being treated as the Jews were under Hitler. I would not wait for the fascist elements in Smethwick to erect gas ovens." If this level of racism is a surprise to you, it is because Britain loves nothing better than to pretend that the country is not racist, that is an American problem. One of the major myths that Malcolm spent time debunking was that there was anything such as American racism. He described racism as a world problem.
Slavery happened in America, so there were millions of black people in the country. So to oppress us, they used vicious racism. In Britain, the plantations are in the Caribbean. So when we were free, we were thousands of miles away and there was no need for racist laws. In fact, slavery was always illegal in England, even when they were the premier slave trading nation in the world. So Britain never had a racist constitution, there was no Jim Crow, so they can pretend that racism never existed. But when we did move to the mother country, we found the same conditions that African Americans did when they fled from the south to the north. I came here to the Marcus Garvey Center, headquarters of the Harambee Organization of Black Unity, to interview my parents about what Britain was like back in the day and why Malcolm X was so inspirational to their work.
My mum, Carole Andrews, worked for the Commission for Racial Equality for decades, and my dad, Maurice Andrews, was a founder of the Harambee organization that opened this building as the Marcus Garvey Nursery in 1976. Both of my parents were instrumental in setting up a legal advice centre, bookshop and a hostel as part of Harambee's fight against the racism that they experienced in the country.
All right, so I really wanted people to understand just why Malcolm is not just for America, but for the whole world. And I think sometimes people misunderstand what racism was like in Britain now and historically. And so I could think of two better people to talk to about Malcolm's influence in the UK. And I really wanted to go back and try to understand. Malcolm comes in 1965 and try and see what was racism like, what was it like being in the UK at that time. And both of you have very different experiences. So Dad being born in Jamaica and moving over here, and Mom, you were actually born pre-Windrush in the UK, right? So when you were growing up, it would have been very different. There'd have been very few black people. Your dad's from Jamaica, Mom's from Manchester. So what was that like growing up in the UK back then?
Well, of course, it's a long time ago. I was born in 1948, so grew up in the 50s and 60s. And we were sort of a novelty, would be the best way to describe it. We lived in Wythenshawe, part of Manchester, and I think we were only one of two black families at the time. And the other family lived quite far away. But we grew up knowing that when my parents decided to get married, my grandmother literally threw all my mother's belongings into the street, refused to speak to her, and only sort of mellowed when my older brother was born. So we were always aware of this racism in the family, as it were. But in terms of external racism, I would say, short of verbal abuse, which was commonplace throughout.
When you say verbal abuse, what do you mean?
You would call nigger. If you walked to the shops, somebody would be there to call you a nigger. Commonly, you were told to go back home. On buses, people would not want to sit with you. My mum got challenged when she was sat with us. Why are you sitting with those niggers? That sort of thing. That was just commonplace growing up.
Dad, you were overseas, right? So you were born in Jamaica, moved over to the UK when you were 13. What was that experience like?
The difference between prejudice and racism. The kids at school who called me a nigger, they were prejudiced. The woman who denied me sweets, she was a racist because she was denying me essential service. People who were denying me housing were racist, right? But there was a lot of prejudice, yeah? And you had to put up with the petty prejudices, and we did. And we overcome them, we challenged them.
The civil rights movement in the States caught my imagination completely. I became immersed in that and sort of rebelled against the things that we'd grown up with, which was, one was clear. I was one of three, so I had three other sisters. I was the oldest girl and I was breaking away from this sort of background that, yes, you need to fit in, you need to blend in, and you need to be as white as possible. Bear in mind, we were a mixed race family anyway.
Malcolm preached the importance of learning our history so that we had the confidence to resist our oppression.
What makes the so-called Negro unable to stand on his own 2 feet? He has no self-confidence. He has no proud confidence in his own race. Because the white man destroyed your and my past, destroyed our knowledge of our culture. And by having destroyed it, now we don't know we have any achievements, any accomplishments. And as long as you can be convinced that you never did anything, you can never do anything.
Well, the first thing is, when you're at school in a white environment, and all the books are white, and you are being taught about the English engineers, James Watts, etc., etc. You've been taught about Marie Curie and people like that. And you never thought about any black people. Yeah. So, and the books never contained anything related to black people. So we had to go out and find where black people were, what happened to us, why come we are not in the books. Yeah. So the first step was to identify, and we went out and went to the library, and we couldn't find any black book on the central library in town. But we kept searching, and in one little corner, we found almost every book you can think of on black people, but it was locked away in a little corner. So we started to read and understand what was going on.
The first exposure was James Baldwin, and his powerful writing, the way he described what was and had happened in the States, was just like an awakening in the sense that obviously I was aware of the civil rights movement and what we all aware of slavery, etc., but the way he wrote about issues struck a huge chord. Yeah. And it was like an opening of realisation that, you know, this is what we've got to focus on. In terms of getting access to books, it's very different then. Extremely different.
Very, very different. Black books you wouldn't see on the shelves, you know, basically. The authors you get were in fact largely Americans. There were a few Caribbean writers, but they wrote and acted in the English fashion, basically. So you didn't get the hard knowledge of who you are and where you were coming from. That was the significant difference.
The most underrated part of the Black Power movement was education, and we have continued this legacy. In the Marcus Garvey Center, we founded the Carole Andrews Community Library, named after my late wife who died from breast cancer. Nicole was the one who got the building open, even chasing out crackheads when she was pregnant. Nicole wrote a PhD about black women and health, and is a huge loss both personally to me and to the movement. The aim of the library is to take control of our own education and continue to share black thought with the community. It was this kind of work that inspired the activism in the past, and Malcolm's autobiography lit the fires of resistance.
And that's where Malcolm X came in. To us, in, you know, being now adult. Malcolm came when I was 18 months out of school. I knew little of his visit. But by the time his autobiography came out and we started reading his autobiography, we began to understand what Malcolm X was about. And the fact that Malcolm X was not just relevant to America. And we could see why he came to England, because the same problem, the degree of the problem is different, but it's the same racism they face. And Malcolm X was quite decisive about his approach, in the sense that he picked it up. And he came to England to try and deal with the Semitic situation, which was extremely bad with Griffiths.
Yes, Malcolm X's autobiography again, direct, clear, passionate guidance in terms of what we're dealing with, who we are, more realisation about your own position and the position of people like yourself.
We weren't relying on white people to solve our problem. And this is the difference between us and generations after us. We set out to find a way to ameliorate our own problem. And we were fairly successful.
Malcolm's words inspired resistance, igniting a spark that led to organisations like Harambee and movements around the world. I'm going to travel down to London to visit the place where Malcolm gave one of his last international speeches just 10 days before he was killed.
On February the 11th, 1965, Malcolm was invited to the London School of Economics by the university's African Students Group to speak about the connection of the African struggle to the diaspora. The old theatre was packed as Malcolm declared that the same heart that moves the African beats in the black man of North and South America and the Caribbean. Dr. Rutazibwa works as assistant professor in human rights and politics in the Department of Sociology, and before becoming an academic, worked as a journalist for Belgian MO magazine covering Africa, the EU, and racism. I can think of few better people to talk about the international impact of Malcolm's work.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us. You work at LSE here, London School of Economics. This is the place, the Old Theatre, where Malcolm gave one of his last recorded speeches. What's it like to be in the actual physical space?
Yeah, it's actually realizing how all the knowledge is there, but then we're made to forget it. So I've been working here for the last 4 years now, and I pass by this theatre on a regular basis, and I didn't know. So I didn't know at all. I didn't know that he came to speak at LSE. I knew about the Oxford Union or the Union speech.
Malcolm's visit to the LSE was just one of the many times he spoke across the UK, with his most famous speech given in his debate at the Oxford Union in 1964, where he argued that it was necessary to use extremism in defence of liberty.
My reason for believing in extremism, intelligently directed extremism, extremism in defense of liberty, extremism in quest of justice, is because I firmly believe in my heart that the day that the black man takes an uncompromising step and realizes that he's within his rights, when his own freedom is being jeopardized, to use any means necessary to bring about his freedom or put a halt to that injustice, I don't think he'll be by himself. I live in America where there are only 22 million blacks against probably 160 million whites. One of the reasons that I'm in no way reluctant or hesitant to do whatever is necessary to see that black people do something to protect themselves, I honestly believe that the day that they do, many whites will have more respect for them, and that there will be more whites on their side than are now on their side with these little wishy-washy love thy enemy approach that they've been using up to now.
I mean, how has Malcolm influenced your own work?
It hasn't, actually, more as a human being in general than just as an academic. But so I grew up in Belgium in a very, very white world, like literally, not just epistemically. And so what I learned, and I also grew up in a white family. So what I learned growing up in Belgium about black people was very vague stuff about Africa, which, you know, involves the jungle and uncivilized people, whatever. So very racist in it. And then the others were obviously images of America, which is obviously the United States being this country that abolished slavery all by itself. We have Uncle Tom, who was actually taught to us as a genuine good book. The Cabin of Uncle
was actually
that was the first, I think, engagement in school.
Oh, wow.
And then you had the duo Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, right? And the one was the good one, and the other one was the violent one, but both of them were important. And then Nelson Mandela also came in. But I'm I'm simplifying a little bit, but not too
But
much.
not really.
But that's literally. So I never, in a serious capacity, was exposed to Malcolm X's thought in school.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like a figure of history.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think read the autobiography when I was already like in my 20s.
Okay. Really.
Which is still more than 20 years ago. But I was doing a PhD in international relations, and I'm of Rwandan heritage, so I wanted to make sense of the genocide in the international community, the UN, walking out of a place on the eve of genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And I took 12 years to finish that PhD because everything I received as information was, I don't know, realism versus constructivism versus whatever, or, you know, international peace building, all of that. And so when I read Malcolm X in my free time,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot started to click for me. And not just him in isolation, but him as a part of the Black thought that came from overseas, but then it made sense to me in terms of trying to make sense of why certain people can die on this planet and why others not.
Okay.
And I think that for me, his thought was not just explaining that in a very clear way, but also while he's explaining it, teaching us how we can refuse that.
Malcolm reached far beyond the walls of universities. What made him special was that he could take complicated ideas and make them plain to everyone. George the Poet is someone walking in that tradition, with his podcast, spoken word, and book track record. Me and George chopped it up on the Make It Plain podcast, covering everything from Obama to rap beefs and Palestine. I had to ask him about Malcolm's global reach and the myths that shape how we understand Malcolm.
Malcolm was is my number one North Star in that respect.
Okay.
You know, there have been times in my life where I have just I bought into the propaganda around Malcolm, not in a way that I didn't like him. I just thought his image was as simple as some of the mainstream portrayals of him were, innit?
Yeah. What's the propaganda? Tell us a bit about it.
The propaganda is that Malcolm X is an American story, of an angry individual who is misguided and reformed out of his misguided activism. I mean, you know, there's all this propaganda around the militancy, like he was made to seem like violence was his unique angle, you know, that was his only contribution. Embracing violence where, you know, it's never framed as counter-violence or revolutionary, you know, preparedness for militant action. But more importantly, the cutting off of Malcolm from his international context. I think that's one of the greatest tricks the devil ever played.
So far, we have shown the impact that Malcolm had on the world. But there is also the stubborn myth that he was solely an American figure. This ties into the dangerous American exceptionalism of movements like the American Descendants of Slavery, ADOS, and Foundational Black Americans, FBA, led by Tariq Nasheed, who made the Hidden Colors series. Both argue that the only true African Americans are those who can trace their families back to a person enslaved in the United States in 1865. Neither will be happy that this black person from Britain wrote a book and made a film about their so-called American hero.
I had a few lines about FBA and ADOS in my book as an example of where the consciousness gets corrupted and mutated. But I do sympathize. There is a very particular experience, and as Malcolm articulated, it's basically a colonial experience where so much of their truth is warped and resold back to them in a harmful, poisonous way. But to say that in defense of who we are going to cut ourselves off from the rest of the African world, and we are planting our flag, we are claiming our stake in this American project. It's just the antithesis of Malcolm. It's the anti-Malcolm.
It is, right? The Malcolm tell you you're not an American. But they seem like they really, really want to be American.
Right. So you just got to denounce Malcolm if you want to. Beyond that, just be clear.
We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American.
We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. And because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness.
In the last year of Malcolm's life, you can hear how disturbed he was about how the political situation in the Congo played out. Yeah. You can hear him making conscious efforts to tie it to the situation in was it Indochina? Vietnam. Talking about, trying to educate the lay Black American audience on, the full context of the Chinese Revolution, etc. So Malcolm was always taking on this task of making the Black American struggle directly interface with the global anti-imperial struggle.
Yeah. When was the first time you came across Malcolm X?
I actually don't remember. I don't remember like how old I was. That's how long Malcolm X or an awareness of Malcolm X has been in my life. It was the movie. It was the Spike Lee movie first. Yeah. And that's what I mean about me buying into propagandistic portrayals of Malcolm for years. That was all I knew, and already I was sold. So it was the movie, and then obviously I read the book, the autobiography. And,
I actually have the autobiography. I bought a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X.
No, you did it. It's a nice picture.
It's a great picture, though.
Great.
It's a good read. The good read is entertaining book.
Yeah.
The autobiography was groundbreaking and remains a best-selling book. It was a remarkable redemption story that captured the imagination of the world. I would always have said that this was one of my favorite books. But after reflecting on it, this book is chiefly responsible for creating the dangerous Malcolm myths. It was used as the basis for the Spike Lee film that made Malcolm a PR image more than a political visionary. The very project that Malcolm was working on when he died, the Organization of African American Unity, the bringing together of his life's work and revolutionary solution, is only mentioned once in his autobiography. I want to better understand the true legacy of Malcolm. So I'm traveling to the source, to Harlem, where Malcolm became the person we remember today.
Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska, raised in East Lansing, Michigan, became a hustler in Boston, and was first sent to Detroit by Elijah Muhammad, where he became one with the city of New York and part of the fabric of Harlem when he was made minister of Muslim Mosque No. 7.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has stopped us from stealing, and we did steal. He stopped us from gambling, he stopped us from cheating, and he stopped us from lying. Stealing runs rampant in Harlem. Gambling runs rampant in Harlem. All types of evils and vices that tear apart our community run rampant in Harlem. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't condemn the victim. He goes to work on the victim. He doesn't say that all of you should go to jail because you have fallen victim to the evils that white man has brought into the community. He teaches you and me the religion that God has given to him as the only cure for the evil habits the white man has brought here among us.
Malcolm saw Elijah Muhammad as a father figure, as the person that saved him from life as a hustler. he always credited the Nation of Islam for cleaning him up and giving him a new purpose. One of the problems with the autobiography is that he originally wanted to praise Muhammad's impact on his life, which is why it focuses so heavily on his time in the streets. It was originally meant as a redemption story.
Columbia University houses the Malcolm X project, so I'm visiting to look through the archives. Thankfully, there is a wealth of information outside of the autobiography in his interviews and speeches. Malcolm's body of work was so impressive that we can debunk the myths and find the real political legacy of Malcolm X.
In just the last few weeks of Malcolm's life, he gave enough speeches and interviews to fill a 200-page book. Contrary to the myth that he was an empty symbol, Malcolm left one of the most extensive analyses of racism and proposed a solution. The autobiography was published after Malcolm was murdered, so it really is Alex Haley's version of Malcolm's life. Parts of the manuscript were cut from the finished product, including a chapter called The Negro. Malcolm understood what had been done to us, that the white slave master severed every link with anything remotely resembling a past, to render his bastard creation, the Negro, into a human blank, a human kind of putty. To be a Negro was to be stripped of your culture, heritage, your humanity. This is why Malcolm embraced the X and refused to acknowledge his slave name.
Mr. O'Connor.
What is your real name?
Malcolm X.
Is that your legal name?
As far as I'm concerned, it's my legal name.
Have you been to court to establish that you are?
I didn't have to go to court to be called Murphy or Jones or Smith. Excuse me for answering you this way.
That's all right.
If a Chinese person were to say his name was Patrick Murphy, you would look at him like he's insane, because Murphy is an Irish name, a European name, or the name that has a Caucasian or white background. And a yellow person, Chinese is a yellow man, and he has nothing to do or no connection whatsoever with the name Murphy. And if it doesn't look proper for a person who is yellow or Chinese to be walking around named Murphy or Jones or Johnson or Bunch or Powell, I think it would be just as improper for a black person or the so-called Negro in this country, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to walk around with these names. And therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once his grandfather, or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. If his name is Bunch, his grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
Was there any line, any point in the genealogy of your family when you did have to use the last name, and if so, what was it?
The last name of my forefathers was taken from them when they were brought to America and made slaves. And then the name of the slave master was given, which we refuse. We reject that name today.
You mean you won't even tell me what your father's supposed last name was or gifted last name was?
I never acknowledge it whatsoever.
Malcolm knew that to repair the damage done to us by white society, he had to be pro-black. He also knew this would mean he'd be labelled as anti-white, a myth that was being created whilst he was alive. Malcolm featured in the 1959 documentary The Hate That Hate Produced, which shed a national spotlight on the Nation of Islam. He witnessed firsthand the impact the press image had on how people saw him. But Malcolm never shied away from condemning the evils that the devilish white society had done and done so much damage to the world. So he turned the hate accusation around on his accusers.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other.
No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God gave you.
My mum explained how important it was to overcome this self-hatred growing up.
When you get to 10, my dad would tell me, you can have your hair straightened. And this
Like it was a prize.
Well, this was a prize. You had to reach 10 and then you could have your hair straightened. Because I used to wear my hair sort of tied back. And then I just thought, no, it's full enough now to have an afro. And it was an extremely large afro for a while. But no, it was never openly referred to, but it was sort of looked at askance. And remarks were made, but not directly to my face.
And of course, the afro was an identification issue. So it was crucial in terms of our women to understand the beauty.
One of the reasons Malcolm is so popular is because he helped breathe life back into us, to make us take pride in our blackness and ourselves. Figures like Malcolm can become more legend than real human beings. So I have come to the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center in Harlem to talk to Malcolm's third daughter, Ilyasah Shabazz, about the man behind the myth and the legend. The Shabazz Center is the old Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm gave regular speeches and was killed on the 21st of February 1965. Malcolm's wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, made sure that the building was saved from demolition so that it would become a hub for learning and carrying on of their legacy. Malcolm's daughter, Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz, serves on the board of the center and has written books about her father and mother, as well as what it was like to grow up X.
So thank you so much for giving us your time and also for the space, which is absolutely beautiful. But it is also the space that your father was killed and you were here as well. So I wonder, what is that emotionally like to just be here in the space all the time? How does that?
So this is the last space that I shared with my mother before she passed away.
As well. Okay.
And there's something really beautiful, the spirit, it's something really beautiful here.
Yeah.
And she had looked forward to retiring and continuing the safeguard and appropriation of her husband's legacy. Yeah. And, I often share that she didn't do this so that her husband, the legacy would be illuminated as much as it benefiting future generations, right? The work that my father did, significant contribution to one's sense of humanity. Yeah. So, I'm the chairperson of the board here, and I love it, just as my mother did.
Okay.
She took a place that represented tragedy and turned it into a place of triumph.
Yeah.
And not for herself, but for others, and that, speaks to the values, the ethical values of my mother.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's overlooked when we think about Malcolm is Dr. Betty Shabazz, right? Really important figure in her own right, and it's really good that you've commemorated her too in this space as well. What did your mother mean to you growing up?
My mother meant everything to me. My mother, I remember being about 4 years old and just looking at her and thinking, oh my God, my mom, she's beautiful, she's God, she's goddess, I always just thought so highly of her. She was brilliant, she was compassionate, she was loving, she was humorous. I mean, she was so many things, she was kind, gracious.
Yeah, and you I've actually heard you speak before on different podcasts about growing up with the memories that your mother gave you of Malcolm the man. Because one of the myths, with the documentary, is about trying to get through some of the myths. And when we think about someone like Malcolm, it's this angry, kind of almost mythical figure. But I really wonder, what was Malcolm, just the man, like?
Well, listen, he was compassionate, he was kind, he was loving, right? He was filled with lots of faith.
Okay.
He was led by his service to God. And so, quite naturally, he would be a man who would have a profound reaction to injustice,
Okay.
a profound reaction to dogs being sicked on innocent people, right? Who they just want to, you know, they want to enjoy these inalienable rights.
Yeah.
He had a profound reaction to churches being bombed, people's homes being bombed, you know, the lynchings that were occurring. He had a profound reaction to that. And so, yes, he was emotional, and he appeared to be angry when he had a reaction to those kinds of atrocities that were occurring around the world, right? And so it's usually that image that people use to say, look at him, he's an angry man. Well, you know, he was filled with such compassion because he was only in his 20s when the world learned of him, right? And he was 39. I'm old enough to be his mother, you know? I might even be old enough to be his grandmother. You know, I mean, not really, but...
But when you think about how young he was when he died.
Sure. And he was compassionate. And so the image that was portrayed of him was inaccurate, and it was false. And so my mother safeguarded this legacy of her husband, you know? She made sure that his daughters knew who he was in his soul. Yeah. You know, we didn't learn about Malcolm X, the icon, from our mother. We learned about Malcolm, the compassionate, loving, thoughtful, kind, creative, brilliant visionary.
To debunk the myths surrounding Malcolm, there is probably no one better to speak to than Dr. Jared Ball, who co-edited The Lie of Reinvention that brought together scholars and activists, including those who knew Malcolm, to correct some of the myths that were peddled in the late Manning Marable's The Life of Reinvention. Professor Ball was more positive about Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm than I expected.
So part of it is, yes, the autobiography is flawed in that, look, Malcolm had an agenda. He had a goal. He didn't get to see the final product. Alex Haley certainly had a politics and a goal and a set of interests with the work that were not the same as Malcolm's in terms of having a political impact and the ultimate, so it's an imperfect document. It is not, to be looked at uncritically or without some sort of critical eye. But as others have pointed out, I mean, Amiri Baraka pointed this out, Dhoruba bin Wahad has pointed this out, John Henrik Clarke has pointed this out. I mean, many have pointed this out, that when you read, for the most part, for most of us, when you read the autobiography, for all of its flaws, it encourages a radicalism. It encourages people to become more revolutionary than they are when they started the book.
So the film, Malcolm X, Denzel Washington, great performance, that has become like huge in framing how Malcolm's understood. Spike Lee, was he the right person to direct a Malcolm X movie?
I don't think Spike Lee was the right person to make a film about Malcolm, but to be fair to my criticism of Spike, I don't think anyone should be making a film about Malcolm in the context of this mainstream commercial media environment. So I don't want films about Malcolm or radical history or revolutionary history in that context. The way Spike Lee created a narrative around his taking over the film from a white director, having to bring in his friends like Oprah and Bill Cosby to fund the rest of the film. All of that was to create this narrative of black struggle against the system that would carry support for what Spike had done and would protect him against important criticism of the film that should be. It was also a way of creating a protective layer for the black bourgeoisie. The idea that we should want a film that Oprah funded about Spike Lee.
What's wrong with Oprah?
Oh, wow. That's a whole other documentary. But Spike Lee, as a liberal Democrat, as a black capitalist, as the black bourgeoisie, has to present a version that supports his class interests in politics and presents himself as not a threat or not an inhibitor to revolution. And I think, so that's one of the problems, and I'm looking at the poster behind you, but that's one of the problems that I have with the film, that it encourages, it's even used to this day to give Spike Lee a cachet and a credibility that I don't think he deserves, and his class of black elite deserve. I don't think that they deserve that at all.
Yeah, there's a Kwame Ture actually. What he said, Spike Lee making a film would be like a Zionist making a film about Yasser Arafat. And I think one of the things, Malcolm talks a lot about many things. One of my favorite Malcolm theories is House Negro, Field Negro, right? Where he predicts that, look, civil rights, what it will get you a class of people like Spike Lee, like Oprah.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" He was as sick as the master. When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro.
I do have a slight problem. So again, all due respect to Malcolm, of course, but and I know he didn't mean this, but the way his field Negro, house Negro speech gets retold, I think does do some problems historically.
Okay.
For instance, not everybody in the house had it good. And not everybody in the house was a sellout. A lot of rebellions began in the house and were supported by people in the house. And the people it put in the house were not themselves free and having free choice.
Everybody's slave, right?
So, but this idea, it gets recounted as everybody in the house were traitors and sellouts, and of course lighter skinned, and everybody in the field were darker skinned and revolutionaries, and which is also not true. So that's my only small issue with that. But in general, I mean, Spike represents what, in Malcolm's use of that analogy, the house slave telling the story of all rebelliousness. I don't even know what else to say. It's a major problem.
I think for me, the bit of the movie which revisit is at the end. Where, they get Mandela's the one that gives the last speech. We intend to bring freedom, justice, and equality. We intend to bring this into being by any means necessary is the line. But in the movie, he doesn't say that. It cuts to Malcolm saying it, and apparently it's because Mandela refused to say by any means necessary, which kind of tells you maybe he's not the one for the film. But the fact that nobody seems to be bothered that Mandela's in the movie and that Mandela somehow represents black freedom, where are we as a people when we're there? How badly have we got it if we think that Mandela could represent Malcolm X?
how bad is hard to assess, but it's very bad. Because, I mean, but again, you have to think about, to the average viewer who doesn't know much about Malcolm, who by that part of the film feels like they now understand Malcolm, to expect that they would have the nuanced understanding to understand what was happening in that scene, and you telling me that about why Mandela didn't say the line is news to me. Like, this is news. Like, you know, when I saw the film, I thought, this is probably a problem.
Honestly, I'd say Malcolm would have hated Mandela. He would have called him Uncle Tom Leader. He would have had nothing positive to say.
I think so. I think you're right. Again, it's hard to speculate, but if you look at the historical record, even at the point where Malcolm was trying to mature his criticism, I mean, he was very clear. You know, I'm with Lumumba. I'm with Nkrumah. I'm with whatever would have been the state of Cabral's revolution. That's the team he was on. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, honestly, I haven't even thought as much about this as I should have. You raise a very good point here. Mandela's presence in that film, if nothing else, signifies what it isn't there to do.
Or what it is there to do.
Or what it is there to do.
Contrary to the myths, Malcolm remained a revolutionary after he died. He did not become a civil rights figure, but remained the fiercest critic of the limits of the movement. Malcolm and Martin only met once briefly, and he never stopped sending for King, even after he left the Nation of Islam.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
The more difficult myth to counter is one that appears in Marable's Life of Reinvention, that Malcolm believed that women were inherently inferior and subordinate to males. There is no doubt that the nation have, and still have, dubious views on the role of black women in the struggle, and it would be wrong to pretend that Malcolm was an early black feminist. His declaration that the most disrespected person in America is the black woman has become a popular quote since Beyonce shared it to the culture.
The most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman. And as Muslims, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us to respect our women and to protect our women. And the only time a Muslim really gets real violent is when someone goes to molest his woman. We will kill you for our woman. I'm making it plain, yes. We will kill you for our woman. We believe that if the white man will do whatever is necessary to see that his woman gets respect and protection, then you and I will never be recognized as men until we stand up like men and place the same penalty over the head of anyone who puts his filthy hands out to put in the direction of our women.
For me, his message is about dignity. Mm-hmm. And I even get historically how that came out. Yeah. Because the way that the dignity of brown and black men is being attacked in the white supremacist world is a very particular one. Yeah. So I understand the reflex to go to masculinist, paternalistic direction as a response to it. But I can also see, I don't know, I don't find it difficult to reason with my black brothers to say, like, let's do something else. So Malcolm X doesn't stop us from having that conversation. So I think sometimes it can be lazy politics to then say, because he said it, he's not useful for that conversation. Yeah. I think he is when it comes to urgency and when it comes to dignity.
Yeah. Downstairs in the center, you have a frieze. It shows all the different women who were influenced by Malcolm X.
That's right.
Even Maya Angelou was going to come and work with him before he was killed.
That's right.
And even the organization OAAU had women, female members. Malcolm had such a big place for women. Why do you think it is that there is this myth still? Why is it so prevalent still?
I think there's everything that tries to prevent one from respecting and thereby learning, about his work.
Okay.
Right? And sometimes it's even self-hate or the inability to really appreciate and respect someone of Malcolm's caliber.
Yeah.
Right? Because what did he do? He put a mirror up. He put a mirror up to the negative acts of individuals.
Yeah, he showed America and the world what it is, right?
One of the things that my father said is that a society is based on the progress of its women.
Yeah.
I mean, so he understood the importance of the woman's role in society. He was inspired so much by his mother, by his big sister, Ella Collins, by his eldest sister, Hilda Little. All of these great relationships that he had with women and the respect that he had for women.
It is clear that Malcolm was not just talking to men, but to all black people. He also understood the debt to the women in his life, including his mother, who told him to love his blackness, his sister Ella Collins, who supported him throughout his life, and figures like Maya Angelou, who he met in Ghana, and whose plans to work with him were cut short by his assassination. Legendary activist Fannie Lou Hamer, who famously testified live on TV the brutality she suffered at the hands of the police, thought of Malcolm as a good friend, and it was her he was introducing when he declared that nobody can give you freedom. We know that Malcolm trusted women because he actively recruited women for leadership roles in the OAAU, like Lynn Schiffler, who ran the organization when he was on his travels, and Sarah Mitchell, who crafted the aims and objectives. To mark 60 years after his assassination, the Shabazz Center organized a memorial that I was lucky enough to be able to attend with my children to honor the legacy of Malcolm X. I was able to catch up with some of the notable guests who were invited.
Wow, how important was his mother, Louise Little, in raising Malcolm? In the Malcolm that we have today, how important was his mother?
Oh, she was the most significant. When you talk about an understanding of true black consciousness, both of his parents are responsible for that. People misassociate his enlightenment with his time in prison and then joining the Nation of Islam. But primarily he grew up with this understanding because of the Marcus Garvey movement, because there were other families and neighborhoods across the country that had the UNIA chapters, including Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, so one of the myths you want to debunk is that Malcolm was a misogynist, he hated women, he wasn't. Because you'd be surprised how many people say this to me all the time. So what would you have to say to someone who said that Malcolm has nothing for black women?
There's a speech where he clarifies that the black woman is the most disrespected and misunderstood human in this nation. He prioritized the black woman primarily because of how he was raised by his mother. And then as he grew up and when he aged out of foster care, his big sister Ella Collins was also a key primary role in his life. So he always honored and had reverence for the intellectual, the spiritual, the emotional capacity that women offer. And I think even today he would be giving a lot of black women, especially their flowers.
I've had the opportunity over the last few decades to be here a lot. And every time I walk in here, I feel so many things. I'm overcome by history. This is the house that Betty Shabazz built after the death of Malcolm X. This is literally the structure, the building where Malcolm X was taken from us. He stood in the Audubon Ballroom and was murdered in front of his wife and his children. And even as I stand here right now, fully aware of the history and knowing it, and having been in this building a million times, it's still
emotional, right?
It still hits me every single time. Every single time.
Yeah. I mean, how have they turned the place from tragedy into triumph?
The work that the Shabazz family has done is extraordinary. this was a site of pain. This was a site of violence. This was a site of tragedy. And through the labor of Betty Shabazz, the spirit of her children, the efforts of the community, they have been able to transform this place into something different. And this is who black people are. This is who African people are. We've always had to take the worst that the world gives us and transform it into something else.
Yeah.
And what the Shabazz Center is now, words can't capture how beautiful and amazing it is.
Today, on the 60th anniversary on this historic day, we updated people about this landmark lawsuit where the state of Malcolm X is bringing suit against NYPD, the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice for the conspiracy to assassinate Malcolm X and to cover up the assassination of Malcolm X. Obviously, President Trump declassified the files on John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. And we formally requested on this day, the 60th anniversary, that he declassify Malcolm X records as well. Okay. Because his assassination was just as important as those other assassinations. What is it about Malcolm's assassination that is so secretive that you will hide that and not hide the rest?
Yeah. Why is it so important to sue them? Like, why is it so important to get justice all these years later?
Obviously, justice is about accountability, but also it hopefully will prevent them from ever conspiring to kill one of our great leaders in the future. Yeah. I mean, this is about not just trying to reckon with the dastardly deeds of the past, but it's about looking forward to the future. And you know, Malcolm is an inspiration where he said, I believe in truth no matter who tells it, and I believe in justice no matter who it benefits.
Yeah. And so his lawsuit is really powerful, really important as well. Yeah. And what will be the outcome, do you think? So one more last question. What do you think the outcome of the lawsuit will be? What are you looking for?
I believe justice has been delayed for 60 years, but it won't be denied. We will get to the truth. We will get justice for Malcolm X.
The most dangerous Malcolm myth is that he left no political program. In reality, when he died on this spot on February the 21st, 1965, he was at a meeting for his Organization of Afro-American Unity. He founded the OAAU in '64 to be the organization that brought together those in the diaspora with those on the continent.
Represent the essence of mankind's hopes and good intentions, desirous that all Afro-American people and organizations should henceforth unite so that the welfare and well-being of our people will be assured. We are resolved to reinforce the common bond of purpose between our people by submerging all of our differences and establishing non-sectarian constructive programs for human rights.
Malcolm left us a blueprint. We need to organize locally, nationally, and globally. Put all our money together and support departments of education, health, economics, and whatever else we need. This is the Malcolm they don't want you to see, the one that can set us free.
Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States, but they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba, and those in Brazil, and those in Venezuela, and those throughout the Caribbean, and Haiti, and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists, and to colonialism as it exists in the West.
The trip to New York was eye-opening, both to the legacy of Malcolm and the responsibility we have to continue his work. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Malcolm's work is already influencing those on the ground today. Malcolm wanted to build a black united front, bringing together those at the grassroots. Coming back to the UK, I want to highlight what that work looks like. Malcolm stressed that education is the passport to our future, and that we had to make sure young people were at the heart of what we do. I was fortunate to come across the work of Mentivity, who have a purpose-built space in South London as part of their efforts to reclaim the block for young people. Sace Holmes-Lewis is the founder who shared the vision for Mentivity and how Malcolm has influenced their work.
Malcolm X, Brother Malcolm, is a massive inspiration for me. It has been since the first time I came across him, the first time I watched the film, which was very, very powerful. Would it come out 92, 93? So I was about 10, 11. But I was always told about Malcolm X and, the civil rights movement, but Malcolm X always stood out to me because he was just so, at that time, radical. Yeah. And I saw myself as a radical, growing up in a council estate, and I would just tell people as it was. And that's what I really respected. So, the way that he stood up to the oppressors on a day-to-day basis was something which was truly inspirational for me. And as I got older, when I read his book, his autobiography, that changed my life. Yeah. It literally changed my life, and it really put Islam on my radar, as an 18-year-old, and that's what really kick-started my journey into Islam, which I became Muslim now nearly 2 years ago. So it's just, he's a powerful man, and his legacy lives on, and everybody knows who he is. Yeah. And for me, if I can do even, 1/10 of what he achieved, that would be, just a real honor, to be honest. But yeah, he's a really, really massive inspiration for me.
Why is Malcolm is Malcolm even still relevant for young people, for that vision, for the things we want to do?
Without doubt, his name comes up even without me prompting it, and it's really, really important. And when I go to schools and do talks, I actually finish off with a Malcolm quote: "Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those that prepare for it today." And that's really what it's about, Education underpins everything that we do, in life. And if we are not receptive to learning, then we're not going to be receptive to growing. We're not going to be receptive to healing. We're not going to be receptive to rehabilitation. And I think that's really, really important for us, as a global diaspora.
Why do you think we're further away from that unity than we probably were when Malcolm died?
I think social media can be used for good, but I think it dilutes a lot of the good that we need to access. Yeah. And I think because it's really reduced the attention span of this generation that we have, they don't have a foundation to which to build upon. And I think that goes back to education again. I think we now have to think about how are we educating and preparing our young people to actually receive the information that they might have to sift through on Instagram, on Snapchat, whatever it may be, on TikTok, to get to the information that they need to uplift them.
Malcolm spoke about the desperate need to build a political education that can open our people's minds. And he focused on trying to reach out to the youth. In carrying on that mission, I visited a youth club in Birmingham, not far from the Marcus Garvey Centre, to discuss Malcolm with a group of young people. So, you said before, you know who Malcolm X is? Yeah? What do you know about Malcolm X? Anybody want to be brave?
Okay, so Malcolm X, he was an activist leader for black people in America during the 50s and 60s before his assassination.
From what I've done on my own research, obviously I know he was one for the people and one who was ready to take action, and he wasn't really about just words. He was ready to really make a real difference when it comes to us as black people and as one.
I'm going to say when it comes to Malcolm X, his relevance has been not shown as much, and I feel like that's only because of the way schools and especially ones in the UK have treated him. I feel like when it comes to like Black History Month and stuff like that, they'll go on about black figures and they'll mention him, but they will never specifically say what he did and what he was good for. They'll mention people such as like Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks, possibly even Harriet Tubman, but names like that, and they won't really appreciate what he's done.
I also think that schools should like teach us about him and stuff more, because we don't really know a lot. They don't really teach us in school about him and stuff.
It was clear that the young people were still battling some of the same racial prejudices, and Malcolm could have been speaking directly to them about issues like policing.
Problems with the police. Like, for myself, I've only had like one, maybe like 2 incidents with them, but with like people I know and stuff, it will be them being, I'm not going to say like targeted, but I'm going to say mostly picked out of like a specific group. Like, it's happened a few times to people I know, family and friends wise. So that's mostly it. It's mostly just problems with the police.
I've seen it for myself, but from what he said, obviously, yeah, it is the case, because a lot of the times, especially the young black boys, like especially in this area as well, you don't usually see or think of them as, okay, they're gonna be up to something actually proactive, gonna actually be doing something. It's just the automatically fact that, oh, they're gonna do something that they shouldn't be doing.
They also still face long-held prejudices.
Sometimes when I don't get my hair done like this, yeah, people like want to like say stuff about my hair and be rude, so I just get it done because I can't be bothered for what they're saying.
What do they say?
Sometimes they say that my hair looks messy, or that why isn't your hair done and stuff, when I don't do it like properly. And it just annoys me, so I just get my hair done most of the time.
I think for black people, like in general, I think for our hair, it's like really important to our culture, because obviously having Afro hair, like genetics in our DNA, it really helps us connect and bond with each other. And also like with braids and other hairstyles like that, it's like the main covenant between our culture as well, because you could style it multiple ways, you can embrace it. It might have like a story behind it where you could share it with it and maybe tell other cultures about it and celebrate it as unity.
But we still need to recognize that no matter what, we are the people who they've passed down to carry on this as a black community and as black people, to carry on showing how great we are and how powerful we can be.
I mean, this is a question for everybody. Are you proud to be black?
I'm proud to be black because that's what I was born as.
For me, I'm proud to be black because many of the things we have, like good cooking, good music, and a loving, supportive family that's always been there for us, stories that you can share, eat around the table and you can just laugh and talk.
It's clear that Malcolm's message and his politics are just as important as they ever were, and it is up to us to continue his legacy.
We as black people, we are the ones in danger, and we really have to come together and look at these economic reality. We can't simply be dancing our night away and sounding off on social media. We've got to get back to the nitty-gritty, to the community, and build up our communities. It is crucial if we are to survive.
In Malcolm's time, he understood that he understood the need for internationalism, and he was ahead of his time in that respect. And decades, over half a century later, he's still ahead of his time. People still don't fully understand that or fully embrace that.
I think people like Malcolm X, they make us understand the obscenity of a lot of how we are packaging both political struggle, but also intellectual work, but also, maybe work of imagination. I think we have to stop wasting time, not just for practical reasons, but he gave us a language about the obscenity of what we see that we keep on reproducing as a global order. And so for me, that's why he continues to be relevant today.
It's unfortunate that he be this relevant. It would be great had his revolution occurred and we were commemorating him in some sort of post-revolutionary moment, understanding that we don't but the reality is everything he wanted us to deal with is still operating against us, and in some ways in more aggressive and effective ways. So there's nothing about Malcolm that is at this point passé or irrelevant, even if we wished in some ways that some of it would be.
Young people organized these marches around the world, right? Proclaiming that Black Lives Matter, but they also were quoting Malcolm. And I think, what we had deduced was that they were looking for someone who spoke truth to power, who was reliable, who was authentic. And as a result, they discovered Malcolm. And they realized, this is what he was reacting to. He had a profound reaction to injustice, lynching, and all of these horrific things that challenged one's humanity.
And I think that will be relevant for many years to come, and we need to preserve his story, his history, his legacy, which you're doing through this. And, hopefully through the work that I do, I get closer to what he achieved, And as I said, Black empowerment and unification of the people is the most important thing, because we're up against a very, very difficult, oppressive, heinous system, and it will take away our leaders. So let's keep going, keep pushing. I think that's the message that he leaves with me. Keep pushing, keep going. We can't give up.
If you look at the wider picture, a lot of Black people are struggling economically, socially. The situation in schools hasn't improved in terms of the curriculum, the way children are treated. There's still disproportionate numbers of Black children falling into the system of suspensions and the rest. It's not a rosy picture. Clearly there are a lot more Black people doing a lot more different things that they would have been doing in the 60s, in positions of power, etc. But the underlying picture, in my view, hasn't really changed. The problems are still there. The inequalities are still there. Malcolm is as relevant today as he ever was.
By any means necessary.
Malcolm left a clear political legacy, and we have picked it up. Harambee OBU is based on the OAAU, and we are trying to build the Birmingham branch with departments of education, health, economics, and legal. We're also organising the Convention of African People to bring us together across the diaspora and the continent. 100 years after his birth, it's time to pick up the mantle. Nobody can give you freedom. It's up to us to come together to take it.
We hereby present this charter. Number one, the establishment. The Organization of Afro-American Unity shall include all people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In essence, what it is saying, instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do. And once we get their allies, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help. That's a drag.